exactly is Project 2025? Has it gone away? The crucial answer, of course, is no. I've been researching this, I've been reporting on it for several months now. There's been a bunch of major developments in this ongoing story. First of all, back around July, August of this year, there was a huge amount of negative media backlash against Project 2025. What we saw is mainstream media outlets like MSNBC, CNN, and others, they had started reporting on it. There was a number of articles written about it. There was Jenny Cohn, for example, in the Bucks County Beacon, and I interviewed her on my podcast, the Dismantling Doctrine podcast. I did a couple of episodes on Project 2025. You can also check out the live stream that Chris Shelton and I did on his YouTube channel. Speaking of cults, we did about a whole episode on Project 2025. Then the second sort of development was on the campaign trail, Joe Biden, when he was still running, and then he stepped aside. And of course, now Kamala Harris, they started attacking Project 2025. They made it a major plank in their platform. And what's interesting is the Democrats were able to connect Donald Trump with Project 2025. And what happened was then there was a huge backlash against Trump's campaign and his connection with the Heritage Foundation. The third development was that Trump, of course, tried to deny, he tried to distance himself both from the Heritage Foundation and Project 2025, falsely claiming that he knew nothing about it. For example, Trump said back in July, he said, quote, "I have no idea who is behind it, Project 2025. Then a few weeks later, of the people behind it, he claimed, quote, "They are extreme. They're seriously extreme, but I didn't know anything about it." So, of course, Trump again is lying, but we'll see that he did know about Project 2025 and the Heritage Foundation quite in depth. The fourth interesting thing, of course, was that Trump selected J.D. Vance of Ohio as his vice presidential running mate. Now we see that Vance is closely allied to Heritage. According to journalist Alex Shepard, he says, quote, "Vance has deep ties to the Heritage Foundation and in particular to Kevin Roberts, who has been president of the right-wing think tank since 2025 and is the architect of Project 2025. Vance, he says, has praised Robert for helping to turn the organization, now quoting Vance, into the de facto institutional home of Trumpism, and he's endorsed elements of Project 2025. So that's interesting that Vance has deep ties to both the Heritage Foundation as well as Project 2025. The fifth interesting development was that Paul Dans, who was the head of Project 2025, he resigned in August. Now, was this due to negative media attention? It's interesting because there was an article on the BBC in July. Journalist Sam Cabral said, quote, "Mr. Dans said in a statement that he would leave his post as the head of the 2025 presidential transition project in August. Electoral season is upon us," he says, "and I want to direct all my winning efforts to winning bigly," he said. Going on, Dan said, "To everything there is a season," of course, quoting from the book of Ecclesiastes. And then going on from the BBC article, he said, "Project 2025's policy platform was always expected to be finalized around the time of the Republican convention earlier this month." And interestingly, Dan said, quote, "We completed what we set out to do, which was create a unified conservative vision, unified behind the cause of deconstructing the administrative state. This tool was built for any administration dedicated to conservative ideals." And of course, the Project 2025 hasn't gone away. It would continue to work on this database of potential hires, a list of policy recommendations for the former president's campaign for review. So just because Paul Dan stepped down doesn't mean that Project 2025 has gone away. Now, the interesting thing, number 6, is ProPublica in early August of this year broke a story in which dozens of training videos of Project 2025's Presidential Administration Academy surfaced. And what happened was a great deal of the content in these training videos was perhaps predictably quite disturbing in terms of what these trainers spoke about. Now, that story alone caused a huge amount of controversy around Project 2025's true agenda. They've given us a window into what these trainers think are important policy items for new government employees to support should Donald Trump win the presidency. And number 7, with the negative attention he received about Project 2025 and the Heritage Foundation, Trump has since announced his own presidential transition project. Now, according to an August article in Politico, journalists Rachel Blade, Eugene Daniels, and Ryan Leza report that, quote, "Trump has now launched his own officially blessed transition effort headed up by former SBA Administrator Linda McMahon." Of course, she's the wife of Vince McMahon of the WWE wrestling. She's a very hardline Trump supporter. And interestingly, some of the people that were named to be part of this new presidential transition project, ex-Democrats Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, are honorary co-chairs. Some of the other people, it's very interesting when you find out they have some deep ties to Donald Trump and his former presidency. Number 8, it's interesting. Trump then refused the help of the GSA, which is a governmental body. They're on hand, whose their official job it is to help new presidents transition into their roles. But according to that Politico article I just cited, there's a couple of reasons why Trump is foregoing the help of the GSA. They say first, quote, typically presidential transitions get a major helping hand from the Federal General Services Administration, that's the GSA, which provides office space, technology, and other back-end support that can be crucial in getting a transition operation up and running in the chaotic aftermath of an election. Accepting GSA help means adhering to a $5,000 per donor contribution limits in funding overall costs that can exceed $10 million, and Trump allies would prefer to ease the fundraising burden by having fewer people cutting bigger checks. For another, the second reason they say, Trump's team simply does not trust the GSA after its 2016 experience, with some blaming federal workers for leaks of potential administration hires and widespread dismay with the agency's decision to hand over transition records to special counsel Robert Mueller. And quote, number 9, the final sort of development, because of the negative backlash Trump and Project 2025 and of course the Heritage Foundation have received due to all this media attention, a new player has emerged, but far more quietly than the Heritage Foundation. And what we find out is this is called the America First Policy Institute, and they have stepped into the breach. This is a really important thing. So what exactly is the AFPI, the America First Policy Institute? According to an article by the Influence Watch, they say, quote, America First Policy Institute, or AFPI, is a right-of-center policy think tank and advocacy organization founded in 2021 by Brooke Rollins and Larry Kudlow, former advisors to President Donald Trump. The organization develops and promotes right-leaning policy on a broad range of subjects or topics. And this is an interesting thing because what's happening is that even though they started only in March 2021, they were set to have 35 employees upon their launch with a first-year budget of $20 million. And President Brooke Rollins has said she expects the budget will double to $40 million by 2022. And of course, they've already done that. And what's interesting is that Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner, of course, her Trump's daughter and son-in-law, they served the Trump administration as quote unquote advisors. They're advisors now to the organization. And of course, we saw that Linda McMahon, wife of Vince McMahon of WWE fame, former president and CEO of WWE, she's the current chairwoman of the AFPI, and she's got long-standing ties to the Trump administration. She served as the administrator of the Small Business Administration during his tenure as president. And there's some other interesting staffers on the AFPI that have ties to the Trump administration. We saw Larry Kudlow. He's VP of the board. He worked in the Trump White House as the director of the National Economic Council. Brooke Rollins, of course, who's the president and CEO. She was the former director of Domestic Policy Council for Donald Trump. Doug Holscher, he was a CFO, was the director of intergovernmental affairs for Trump. And there's some other interesting names here. According to that article by the Influence Watch, they say, quote, other Trump administration and campaign alumni such as former Energy Secretary Rick Perry, former acting Homeland Security Secretary Chad Wolf, former Director of National Intelligence John Ratcliffe, retired Army Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg, the former National Security Advisor for Vice President Mike Pence, former Trump White House spiritual advisor Paula White Cain, and former NFL player and Trump campaign surrogate Jack Brewer have positions in the AFPI as well, end quote. And that's interesting because what the AFPI is doing, according to that article in Politico, the goal for AFPI initially was synonymous with that of Heritage and Project 2025. Their idea was to craft a set of policies for the next incoming conservative president, read Donald Trump, set up an administration that will quickly enact those policies from day one, thus undoing much of Joe Biden's legacy, and avoid getting bogged down in similar issues to what happened in the first Trump presidency. And that's basically what the story is with the AFPI and how Project 2025 came along. And that is that when Donald Trump became president the first time, he had no idea. He didn't have a clue what he was doing. And of course, we find that when he started appointing people, that a lot of them he fired. He was tired of them. They were leaking things. They were pushing back against some of his worst impulse. The difference now with Heritage and AFPI is that they've already got an army of people that they're training up now to basically take office on day one, take command of the governmental infrastructure. They're planning to fire, I've heard, up to 50,000 federal workers and replace them with people who have an ideology that's quote unquote similar to what Donald Trump and the Republican Party has now become. So this is an interesting thing, an interesting development. Just because we heard maybe that Project 2025 has died a slow death, it hasn't. It hasn't gone away. Yes, maybe they were too overeager in getting their information out there, and it kind of burned them. But now you have to keep an eye on the AFPI, the America First Policy Institute. So apparently now, according to insiders, AFPI is now, quote, sitting in the driver's seat on the issue of transition. The main agenda is to avoid the sort of negative attention that landed Heritage and Project 2025 in so much hot water recently. And so far, it appears to be working. We see that Trump hosted AFPI fundraisers at Mar-a-Lago. His PAC, the Save America PAC, donated to AFPI. The first major speech he delivered after leaving D.C. was at an AFPI event. So they've essentially gotten permission from Trump. The key connective tissue appears to be Linda McMahon, former Trump cabinet member and now part of AFPI. And according finally to that Politico article, quote, they say their goal is to get a structure in place that will allow for the correct formula of personnel and pursuing the right policy early on, said one Republican lobbyist who worked for the Trump administration. They have stuff ready to go off the shelf that they can present as options. This includes quote unquote recommended actions for the new president on day 1, day 100, and day 200. So this is an update on what's happening to Project 2025 and the Heritage Foundation. Just because they received some negative backlash does not mean they've gone away. They've kind of gone underground now, and this new player, the AFPI, has taken over. So watch out for them. Watch out for what's going on with the Trump candidacy, the Trump presidency, if he should win, God forbid, in November.